I'm John Ingalls, and welcome to the Serve Campus podcast, a resource for campus ministry workers and volunteers across Canada, providing inspiration, education, and coaching for people leading ministries on post-secondary campuses. And our goal is to encourage and resource you in your vital work on universities, colleges, and institutes, wherever you are. And here's our host for today, Jordan Clark.
Thank you very much, John. And I have the privilege of interviewing Tammy Junghans from the University of Manitoba. Leads a little club there called Segway and works with her husband at Convergence Church. And we're going to be talking about her role on the campus there and what they are doing there. It's pretty amazing. And Tammy pretty much had the honor of influencing me for Red Frogs, to do Red Frogs, and putting me in my place a little bit. And so I appreciate her. And welcome, Tammy.
Thanks.
And I said your name correctly, right? Your last name?
Yeah, you said the name correctly. The church is Converge Community Church.
Well, not Convergence.
But you're
sorry.
really close. Really. So what do you mean by like putting you in your place? That's interesting.
Well, I mean, you trained me, you taught me. Like I pretty much have to, just always listen to you now, right? So in your wisdom and
okay, I won't let the power go to my head.
So how long? Yeah, how long have you been doing university ministry, and how long have you been in your position at the U of M?
Well, since Greg and I were married, decades ago, we've worked together influencing and ministering, discipling youth and young adults. I felt a real strong call to the U of M when we lived here in Winnipeg. So it's been probably 12 years since that really stirred up in my heart. And then, I guess I've been in the role for like 11 years-ish.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how does it feel?
Do I feel old? Is that what you're asking me? Yes. Some days I feel old and some days I feel young.
We went through a COVID season, but you have celebrated some stuff this year. So what are some of the things you've been celebrating in your family?
My goodness. Well, our third child, Brianne, she graduated from high school. So she's actually heading to the U of M this fall.
Nice.
And by heading to the U of M, I mean like sort of heading online to the U of M.
Yes.
My oldest daughter, Rach, she got married to a great young man this summer. So I have earned a new title, mother-in-law. So weird.
Congrats.
I do not feel old enough to be a mother-in-law, but here we are.
Just own it, celebrate it, and that's so exciting. So
some great celebrations this year amidst, pandemic pressures.
So we'll get to the pandemic pressures in a minute, of course. And because we're still living through it, we're still working with it. And but tell us a little bit about your call to go to the U of M. Tell us a bit about that story, what happened there, and how God has worked with you and through you in that situation.
So cool. Thanks for asking that, Jordan. So Greg, my husband, was working at our district office, Manitoba, Northwestern Ontario, and helping to develop and write some curriculum for youth pastors. This is 12 or so years ago, to help them help young people transition well. Because in Manitoba, we have a lot of lay leaders. And so we wanted to make sure that they were helping their young people transition well, right? So he was asking me to edit it. And I don't know why, because I'm horrible at editing. But
apparently not.
Here we are.
Apparently not.
I guess. But the numbers, the statistics in the curriculum that he was writing really got under my skin. God really used those numbers, thinking about students who walk away from faith, who walk away from community, post high school. Those numbers just broke my heart. And God started using those numbers to affect how I viewed university, how I viewed young adulthood, and, started me on that journey. And I had a few people along the way who affirmed that. And one of those people was, there were a couple pastors in our district for sure, but I remember Greg working for the district at the time, again, bringing in an author by the name of Alan Hirsch. And I was just like, Greg's, like, not just, you're never just wife, right? But I didn't have a role at the conference. So I had our kids. Greg was running the conference, and Alan didn't need to be in the business meetings, and neither did I. So we just kind of hung out in the foyer with the little kids. And Al really invested in my life then. I remember some really significant, conversations with him over the span of like 2 or 3 days. And Alan is a missiologist. He works internationally, great leader. And I will never forget, I'll never forget those conversations. He made me feel seen and heard and valued. And like, he apologized to me on behalf of, I don't even know on behalf
just
of
what
who.
just the culture, what's going on
exactly
in church
He just
circles
apologized.
or
Exactly.
okay.
Just said, like, we have not valued women and you have a role to play. Like, he just really like invested in me and helped me to see my value. So that was part of the road. And then calling George Warner, who was head of Mission Canada at the time, and saying, look, George, like, I really feel this call to the U of M. I never went to Bible college. I never actually even attended university. I have no plan. I don't know what I'm doing. But I feel this call. Do you want to come with me? Like, do you want to partner with me? And he said, yes, you're who we want. And I'm like, no, George, let me like reiterate to you what I just said. I know nothing. I have nothing, but I feel called. And he just affirmed me, and we worked through the process of credentialing and what that all means, and got me started at the U of M. Like, talk about being seen and valued and heard and like affirmed. Like, that was a real crazy season for that. So like, I love gardening. So I just thought, okay, well, I love to garden. There's this great, campus garden. I'll just start building a relationship there and like get the lay of the land and see what's going on there, and built some really great relationships there. Actually ended up, running the garden for a couple of summers, and like, just, I love to garden. So that's a good place for me. From there, I became a student, and just the desire in my heart to like understand the rhythms of student life and immerse myself in that was kind of the goal. And I definitely have learned about the hardships of student life and how to learn how to write an essay again. It was probably the scariest part for me, actually, was signing up for my first university class going, I don't know how to write an essay. What's APA? What is, like, how do you format an essay? Like,
learning a new format is definitely, it's intense.
I didn't know any format though. I knew zero formats, right? So I needed to learn all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So learning how to become a student again, learning how to learn again, in that context was cool, but challenging.
So that's awesome that you had those mentors in your life too, to pour into you and to just kind of push you a little bit and push you into that role. Cause sometimes when you have a daunting, you've done that for me, just so you know too. And so,
thanks.
But just the idea of like, cause you barely even knew us, and just the idea of seeing an opportunity and pushing someone into that opportunity. And so I think it's important as leaders to be able to empower people in that way, and to understand like, hey, like there's, this could be a good fit, but you're going to have to learn. This is the process of learning and getting trained and kind of doing it while you're in it a little bit. Right. So now that you're seasoned in it, what would you say your role is? What would you say your role is?
So funny.
Worker? Like, what is your role on campus? Like, what would you,
So we started Segway, and then we added Red Frogs. And in the beginning, like, my role was, I guess Rob Powell kind of put it this way. He was in the role that John Ingalls is currently in. So in that role at that time, he just said, hey, Tammy, like, I think that if we were to cast you as a character in a play, your role here would be cool auntie. So,
that's awesome.
And that felt very true and very, very real in that time. But over time, that's kind of transitioned. And in the last year and a half, I have a new role to play. And our students have kind of dubbed me, and these are our students from Tanzania, have dubbed me Momma T. And that awesome. Is really indicative of the role I now play on campus. But I think the biggest things that are important to me in those roles are there are three things I talk a lot about. They are proximity, consistency, and intentionality. Those three things are extremely important in any character role or however you want to see yourself on the campus. We have to be in proximity to each other to build relationship, but proximity is not enough. We have to be intentional about building relationship and having important conversations and seeing needs. And we have to be consistent as well. So that we are trustworthy, we build trust. Not so that we can gain anything, but so people can see us for truly how we are and how we want to be seen. So proximity, consistency, intentionality, those are three really important things. And I think too, in the beginning, there wasn't Segway. Segway wasn't a thing. It did not exist. And Segue in itself, the student group name, just means smooth transition from one thing to the next. It's a literary term, right?
Yeah.
But I think in the beginning, my mindset was much more entrepreneurial in the early sense of starting something where you are a doer, you're a doer, right? You're doing all the time, new things all the time. You're the one doing it. Whereas now, I would probably see myself as more of a developer that's releasing the control, releasing the plans, and just developing others to do the work. It's discipling disciple makers, right? That idea. Yeah. You have to release it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really convicting for me. And we'll talk more after about that, but that's awesome. I love that. And I love just the three intentions there. And I think they build, the main thing those do, especially proximity, consistency, they build trust and they build that relationship instead of coming onto a campus and demanding stuff. Right. Or demanding, a rightful spot, or, hey, we're Christians and we have a freedom of speech, or whatever. Instead of being like that, it's almost a submissiveness to, I know when I first talked to Rob as well, I'll never forget it. He told me that campuses are intentionally intimidating, right? And he said, he's like, that's why you have to get a student number. You have to become a student, and not just to infiltrate, but to build that relationship and play by their rules and respect the rules and respect them. And so I think a fantastic program that does that is Red Frogs. And I'm on fire with my segues today. I think we're getting there with the segues, but I think, yeah, right. I think with that, Tammy got it. So with Red Frogs, for us, it's been an amazing tool. I mean, we're brand new, and we've had our community, our brand new student union, that we don't even know, messaging me and emailing me and asking for, what can we do this fall with them? And so I know when you trained me in Red Frogs, that's what you talked about. I mean, Red Frogs is all about relationship building and building that trust. And
coming alongside, right?
Yes.
You're
where
saying,
you're needed,
Right.
Yeah.
It's not about coming and claiming space. It's coming and being with and walking alongside.
And asking, where can we help? Where's the support needed? And so, how did you get involved with Red Frogs? What was your first interaction with it? And how has that been, going
Yeah.
for you? Yeah.
Before even Segway started, and I was just kind of starting at the U of M, Greg, my husband, actually heard about red frogs and heard about how it was just kind of coming to Canada, and started talking to the forerunner for leading red frogs at the time. And he just had a conversation with him, and really felt like, this is something we could actually like do. But you know what, the timing wasn't right, but it set the stage and it kept our minds open to it. And then when I started engaging with, issues of like human trafficking and injustice and things like that, I started to realize that, we have this like rape culture and binge drinking culture that kind of collide on campus that creates a lot of harm. It's actually a justice issue, a place where, I could see myself being the person to hand out cups of water and just keep an eye out for someone, not in standing over in judgment going, why are you doing this? Because that's not helpful, but just being present. Again, those three things: proximity, consistency, intentionality.
So what are some stories? What things have happened through Red Frogs in your context at the U of M? Do you have any stories you want to share with us, or something that has struck you throughout your years?
Yeah, like I think even going back to that, the other question, just thinking about that too, like I actually knew people who were impacted directly and living with the effects of what happens in some of those environments. So that was a huge motivator for me to be like, okay, this is something that we're going to do. We've got to do this. And I've seen that played out from that time till now, like some of the effects that have happened. I've talked to many, many students who have experienced ill effects from some of those environments. We've done things like, we have interrupted attempted sexual assaults. I remember Greg and I standing at one event and seeing out of the corner of our eye a situation that just didn't look right. And I think it was him that actually saw it first and drew my attention to it. And we walked over to the situation, and it was a young man and a young woman who were having a conversation, and she looked a little bit like vulnerable. And I looked at her. I have Greg behind me, and Greg is not a small person. He's a 6 foot, broad shoulder, like, he's not a small guy, but I'm quite small. I'm 5'4", blowing the wind kind of stature. But I walked over to her with him with me, and I just said, are you okay? Like, do you know this person? And the guy looked at me and he's like, she's fine. And I was like, no, you didn't. Like, this is not what happens here. So I looked at him and I said something like, she can answer for herself. And I turned to her, and she grabbed my hand and walked away with me. And we pointed this young man out to security, and they had said, he has a problem. He's been a problem all night. But it was very clear to us that, they were standing very close to a shaded area, a shadowed area where he could have just pulled her into the shadows. And who knows what would have happened, right? So there have been situations like that where we've been able to see and interrupt plans. We've been able to connect beyond red frogs with people and just follow up with situations like that. We've pointed out brewing situations to security and to party planners. We've been able to, I think, like influence change and help to be part of the conversation, to say, like, why don't we try some things that are maybe not so alcohol fueled? And we've been heard. We've been invited to the table to have these conversations. We've also had, with Red Frogs nationally, there have been campuses that have called our national office and just said, like, hey, when can you get to our campus? We want Red Frogs here. For us, it's like, I love being known as safe people. People who are in trouble, they come to our table or come to a Red Frogs volunteer, and just they know that we're safe. Another story, like, we actually saved, and this is the words of the party planner, that we saved someone's life There was a big set of games going on at our university. It's one that travels around the country, so they take their turns on campuses. But at one particular venue during this series of week-long games, we were at an event where a couple of our volunteers spotted someone on the dance floor, and they were in crisis, and so got to them very quickly, pulled them out, and there was a whole situation with their heart rate dropping and paramedics being called. And it was just a really scary situation. But we were told afterwards, like, if you hadn't found that person, they would not be alive today. So,
It's amazing.
you know, saving a life like that is a pretty impactful thing for us.
What a privilege it is to be. I look at it as a privilege. I know it's a sad situation for people to be in, to get to that point. But it is such a privilege getting invited to do that work on campus. I don't know how you feel about it, Tammy, but it's just even hearing stories like that. And that's just 2 out of how many that you probably have. We could probably do a whole podcast on it, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it's just amazing to hear that. And it's encouraging to hear that. And so now transitioning, we just went through a year where we couldn't really do Red Frogs at that level. I mean, it's a good thing that people aren't publicly in those situations, but I know it's just different because a lot of those people are probably doing it at home or privately now.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things that your group has done since campuses have been shut down for COVID? And you personally took medical leave. So can you tell us a bit about that and what your group has been doing during this, and what and just what you have learned through the process of finding rest?
Yeah. I ended up, so the pandemic kind of shut things down last March, and right away I had an increase of anxiety, just kind of like thinking about, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? And I think a lot of people were in that position. But instead of finding rest and hope where I should have found it, the source of our life, right, and our joy, I didn't. I found I found my value in producing. So what could I produce? And when you aren't in a position where you can do anything and see a product of value that you're offering, it drove me to frenetic behavior, where I would grasp at anything to try to make a difference. Really what I was doing was trying to feed a need in me somewhere. And, our group, I was able to hand off to our leadership the entire ministry. And these are student leaders who are incredible, and I love them. But I just said, look, I need to take a step back. I'm not sleeping. I'm experiencing crazy panic attacks. I'm burnt out. I remember sitting down with my counselor and him saying, like, Tammy, I think you need to take some time away, and just going, no, I'm fine. We just have to push through. Right. But him saying, I think you need to take like 3 to 4. And I thought he was going to say weeks off. And he said months. And my jaw dropped. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, I think your identity and your value are kind of wrapped up in this, and you're having a hard time separating work and life, and like ministry and life, and you need to take some time. And I hated those words, but needed to hear them desperately. So our students continued to connect. They did a lot on Discord and Zoom, and did their best to kind of stay connected, even though things were chaotic for everyone. But, I was able to take that time away. And I think, having my identity wrapped up in producing rather than where it should be rooted was a good thing to identify and a good thing to root out.
Yes.
One book in particular was very impactful for me during that season, a book by John Mark Comer called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And I realized that I really struggled to rest. Sabbath was not a thing for me. I didn't get it. It felt like I grew up with like, oh yeah, Sabbath. And, you know, that's something we talk about in the 10 Commandments. But I didn't really realize that it's God's gift to us, to Sabbath, to rest. And if he wanted us to go 24/7, he would have wired us that way, but he didn't. In the book, John Mark says that, you know, rest is an act of rebellion against a culture that would push you to just keep doing, keep going, because that's how you prove your value, right? He also says it's an act of obedience to God and an act of trust in God. And I realized that I wasn't really trusting God to do what he said he was going to do. I was trying to make it happen. And that's so unhealthy, right? And so not life-giving, and so not joy-bringing. And I've been practicing Sabbath rest since then. Sometimes successfully and sometimes unsuccessfully, but it's just like any other spiritual practice, it's a journey. Yeah. And I had a conversation with my coach today. This is something I would highly recommend to anyone, is getting yourself a coach. There's different roles of people who are trained professionally in counseling or psychology and coaching, whether it's leadership coaching or life coaching. I've had the same professional coach since I started. He was actually one of my first phone calls between George and then John Kaplan. I called John and I said, John, I don't know what to do. I don't know, can you help me form a plan? And he said, yes, right? Another one of those people investing, seeing value, seeing the call, affirming it. But yeah, in this season of, in the fall where I took 3-4 months off there, I've worked on rest. And that's been extremely important as I've re-entered work, ministry. And after my conversation with John today, I was like, you know what? I'm not feeling frenetic. I'm not feeling frantic or like I need to prove something. We're entering this fall much differently.
So are you worried about the fall at all? How would you feel thinking about the fall? Like, is it just giving it to God kind of thing? Like, what are the practical steps you're doing to make sure you don't get frenetic again? Because there's a lot of things. I mean, I think all of us on our campuses, there's a lot of things shifting and moving every day, it feels like, in some cases. And so how are you just dealing with that? And what's your process in dealing with that?
Resting, like prioritizing rest, regularly taking an inventory of where I'm at. If I'm starting to feel anxiety rising in me, going like, okay, where's that coming from? What am I feeling anxious about? And why? Reminding myself of where my value comes from. Sometimes anxiety is situational. We're in the middle of a pandemic. It would be stupid of us to think that there's going to be no effect on us, right? Like we're in a pandemic. So no stress. You should not feel stress at all. No, like that's just unreasonable. Yeah. But the levels of stress we just have to manage. And I think, talking honestly, like I'm 45, like hormones play a role in levels of anxiety and stuff too. Yeah. That's the reality of where I am, and paying attention to my body is important. What I'm eating, drinking, if I'm exercising, those things are so important. And rest is part of that. The good caretaking of the good gift that God's given me. But as I look to the fall, I'm entering with a mindset of peace. And we've decided, we've rejigged our values with Segway to make sure that they're in line with who we want to be. So everything we do kind of goes through that set of values. And we've decided that we're not going to go all frantic in the fall and be at every possible event. We're going to take it slow. We're not starting, say, small groups or anything like that until a few weeks in. Allow people to have an opportunity to acclimatize to the new rhythms, and just meeting people where they're at, whether it's on Discord with our Discord server or in person at events in the park or anything on campus. But not everybody has to be at everything. That's not what it's about. It's about creating connection. So connection with us, but also connection with each other and forming healthy community. And then from there, we'll start our small groups.
That's awesome. For online stuff, you mentioned Discord. So I was going to ask you if there's anything that you learned during the pandemic when it comes to online ministry that you're going to continue doing as a group, and if you see value in that. So what are those things?
I think online, the first thing that I think we need to pay attention to is, where are people gathering online? So if you ask people where they're gathering, rather than creating space for them to gather all the time, I think that's probably the first step. I mean, go ahead. If you feel like you should create a space somewhere, then go for it. But for us, a lot of our students gather on Discord. So we've created a Discord server, and, we've done weekly games nights on Discord, and that's been something that's, carried the relationships through. So I think that's a big one. We can use, social media for, sending out invitations or connecting with people just to give them a taste of who we are. But unless you're having a conversation with someone, you don't really build relationship. It's not real, right? So, and then, we do want to get face-to-face together when it's safe and following restrictions. We respect, the people in place making those decisions, and we want to do our best in that regard. But yeah, it is difficult, and everyone's got an opinion on that. So I hope I don't create a firestorm by making that statement. But yeah,
it's your statement. Own it.
I'm glad it's not me having to make these decisions, right? Like, I respect the authorities in place. Not to say that I don't have questions. I can have questions, but I can also respect at the same time. So
yeah, and I'll affirm you in the sense of, the way I look at it is, do you want to be present somewhere or not? And so how willing are you to be able to be present on campus, right? And so and so I know there is some concern there from a lot of people. There's a lot of opinion because a lot of campuses are checking vaccinations and whatnot. But I think that's also something too that can be challenging in a good way, of just understanding how to care for your community and how to show your community as a leader, how to care for both sides, right? And to understand both sides. And you might not understand one side, but even showing that empathy and that understanding and grace, right? So
I mean, have you been through a pandemic before?
No, I've read about them.
But you know what? I think it's the same with the people making the decisions. They're going off the information they have in real time and trying to make the best decisions that they can. And everything that we do is going to be looked at in hindsight. Oh, we should have done that. But here we are.
Well, and honestly, Tammy, I worship Jesus. I don't worship politicians. I don't worship even my leaders. Like that's who I worship. And so I think understanding that, like you said, like listening to the Sabbath commandment and where are you putting your trust? Is it in yourself? Is it in your politicians? Is it in the rules? Or is it in Jesus? And Jesus, I mean, if Jesus laid down some of his rights in order to save us, then who are we to demand rights all the time? You know what I mean? So, and I think
there's been enough of that through history. Of us as Christians demanding our rights, but that's just my perspective.
And it is hard. It's a hard. I understand why it happens, but I just think for me, being on campus has really convicted me in that personally, because I was very political before this, and I think God has been pruning me, to be honest, and almost judging me in some ways in the last 2 years, and just understanding, like, obviously grace filled, but showing me where I need to wise up, and it's been a good process. So I mean, it sucks at times, but that's God, right?
Pruning
and we're still on
campus,
we're still on campus, and we can serve in a better way now, because it's not just about me and what I believe in. So so last thing, is there one more transformational story that you want to share, even out of the last year of the pandemic? Or is there something you want to share with us that you think is important? Even recently, more recently, is there a story that you want to share?
Yeah. Well, just briefly talk about Converge. Because like I'm not on staff there. Greg runs Converge, and Converge, the church, came out of like a whole process. That's a whole separate podcast, how that came to be, and it's a really cool story. But like I would encourage people to be a part of a church that is like intergenerational. I think that that Converge is really important in helping me in particular to disciple beyond the 4 years in a program at a university. So I volunteer there, and there's a really nice connection between Segway and Converge, where students can connect if they don't already have a church. We still encourage students to be a part of a church, whether it's Converge or another one. It's not a funnel. It's not meant to be that. But it also allows students to connect with the needs of the community outside of your university. Like there's a partnership between Segway and Converge and Manitoba Harvest to create a food bank. And that's something we did during the pandemic, is we started a food bank, as well as our, Red Frogs partnership. They allow us to store things there. And, the English learning project that we have that was started by one of our student leaders. So that's an important connection. But I've got a couple stories. Like, how many minutes do we have?
Keep going.
Okay.
Let's encourage people.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we love to hear stories about is like the moments where someone is like, yeah, you had a conversation with someone and they decided to choose to put their trust in Jesus, right? But I have stories of students who didn't. They didn't. They didn't choose that. They went beyond. They went after school, after they graduated. They went on with their lives. I got a message from one of those students saying, "Hey, Tammy, I just wanted to let you know that I decided to give my life to Jesus." And this was a few years after he was part of our student group. Everyone is welcome, and lots of people don't claim faith for part of our student group. But, getting that message from him, it was like, what just happened? And he said, I wanted to thank you for being part of that journey, being part of that story. So that was very cool. Another student who I met when I was first starting Segway and first starting on the university campus, and she had just come back to faith and was still kind of like figuring it out. And we walked together through the rest of her degree, and she was part of Converge and the startup of the church, in some ways. And then, she's also been married and had a couple kids. And, she sent me a beautiful message the other day about, I was just sitting here thinking about the last however many years of my life, and just wanted to thank you for discipling me along the way. Awesome. She's a mom of a few kids now, and, helping with a church plant in another town, which is really exciting for us to see that. And continuing to grow in her relationship with God. And another student who, it took a couple of years for him, like he would walk by the office, but would never come in. I think that was for like a full year. Just like nervous. I don't know why. Am I intimidating? I don't know. It's just funny. I guess to some people I could be, I'm a little bit, eccentric at times. But anyway, one day, one of his friends that knew him walked by and saw him in the hallway and just pulled him into the office, and started a great relationship. But in his time, he became a leader and had some really defining moments in his discipleship journey where, he was able to learn that God does want to speak to us. He does want to communicate with us. And, it took his intimacy with God to a next level where now he's not just graduated with a great degree. He's actually working at a different university, working with students who live in residence. And I get messages from him like, I just remember those hard conversations you used to have with me. Now I'm having them with other students. And so he's basically doing student ministry in another context, which is, I'm going to get to continue to disciple him. So I love this journey. It's not about like the flash in the pan moments for me, like how many people. It's about the discipleship journey, right? That's really, really really important. And I'm seeing the good stuff that comes from longevity in relationship.
Someone else did discipleship like that really well with 12 people. I wonder who that was.
It
Anyways,
cannot be compared.
no, but I think it's so easy in modern church systems and contexts to, I mean, yeah, it's so easy to get swept up with the flash in the pan. It's so easy to get swept up in kind of the glory of that, right? And oh, we baptized, 100 people today, and like it's an amazing story to tell people, but it's amazing to tell people because it gives you a bit of pride, right?
Yeah.
Being the leader or part of that. And I think what you're describing is exactly what Jesus is calling us to do in humility, is to lead people and walk with them through many stages of their life instead of just one part, right? And so, and you never know, I mean, who knows what other seeds were planted, right? That you don't even know about. And that's why God is so good. And that's why it's amazing doing his ministry. So thank you so much for sharing those stories, Tammy. And
my pleasure.
Just for opening up personally about just different aspects of your life in the last year and the last, in your career at U of M, I'll say that. So, but it's amazing to hear from someone that has been on campus for a minute, right? You've been on campus for a minute.
I love it.
And it's awesome. Yeah. And we can't wait to hear more. Just so you know, we can't wait to continue hearing more. So where can the listeners connect with you online? Where can we find your information? We're going to put your info in the description and stuff of this video and the podcast, but where can listeners connect with you?
I guess if you are pointing a student towards us, you could go to Segway, Segue, UofM.com. That would be our student group page. You could connect with me by email through Tammy Junghans at PAOC.org. So you'll have that in the notes.
Yeah.
And if you are like, I do some speaking in different places or, things like that with young people or with churches. So I'm open to things like that if you're interested in that. But would love to connect, answer questions.
Do red frogs? No.
Do red frogs, do some training, come to Regina. I love launching new ministries. Like I loved being part of training you, Jordan, and watching this thing like take off. Like for me, this is just such a joy. Like I love that in these contexts, like we're not competing with each other. Like this isn't a like, look at how big this ministry is, or look at how, the great things that, like it's not about that.
No.
It's about loving people and empowering people to do this good work.
And the Serve Campus Network, I met all of you at that retreat.
Yeah.
Was it 3 years ago now? 4 years ago? I can't remember.
Couple years.
COVID has destroyed my timeline. So. And right. But it's just, that was the one thing, like, no talk about numbers, no talk about comparing. Like it was just, and then meeting Andy Gurley, who is the founder of Red Frogs from Australia. It was just really cool to be in proximity with all of you. And then I remember the last day I asked you and you're like, yeah, I'll come, like just, we'll set it up. And so thank you for that. And I'm praying for campuses, and we'll be praying for you as things are shifting and it's a new season, right? And just praying that you continue to take care of yourself so that you are doing things in his power, in the Lord's power, not your own. So I think that's important. That's a good lesson to take from this. Yeah.
I'm going to put you on the spot, Jordan, and just ask, what is the biggest thing that you have learned in this year?
So our context, we are about to, I think I'm a doer, just like you, Tammy. You described that. I think I'm burning out too, to be honest. And we are on the precipice of something. I don't know what's going to happen. And I think God is doing something. We are about to receive our charitable number. We have a student club that's ratified on campus. We have approach to people to be on leadership for our club to have us remain ratified. Our union is a brand new union. So newly elected people, and they reached out to me and they're like, are you the Red Frogs Enrich guy? Because our student club is Enrich U of R, and the organization we're planting is called Enrich Life. And we want to enrich, just like Jesus Jesus enriches everywhere he goes. And as Jesus people, we should be enriching that area, whether it's a workplace or campus, so our goal is to disciple people into that. So we're like in the process of building right now. And honestly, from what you've said today, Tammy, and I think from my board meeting last night, I think God is really convicting me and just telling me to relax and saying to me, whether it's taking some time off even this fall, and which freaks me out because we're about to launch a bunch of stuff, and
Tell
you know
me
what I
about
mean?
it.
But at the same time, it's that I think I know it in my head, but in my heart, I think it's something that you need. There is a bit of a disconnect sometimes. You know that you should do something,
Right.
but then you kind of get the pressures around you, and I got to provide for my family, or I got to make sure we're consistent, with this over here, when maybe you have a leader that can be doing that, right? So, so I think over the next week, I think we're just gonna. I've been on campus, but we have someone moving into dorm this year. So I think I'm just going to hang out in the dorm with him quite a bit over the next couple of weeks. And just like you said, start hanging out on campus, help in the garden, which I don't know how to garden, but they're looking for volunteers. So a couple of us from our club are going to help in the garden. And I just love that aspect of what you said, like take it easy, get to know people.
Relax.
Like the volunteers will be provided, right? When we first launched, we had a week to look for volunteers and we found 30.
Yeah.
So I think God will provide if that's what we're supposed to do, right?
Yes, exactly.
So I do appreciate, so for what I don't know what I'm going to be doing yet, but I'm going to find a coach. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to find a coach. I'm going to find some people to hold me accountable in certain areas of my life too. Because I've kind of lost all those people.
Right.
And whether it was just friendships or losing someone in my life, right? So I think it's just understanding that you're not invincible. And sometimes doing isn't the best thing all the time, right? Just like you mentioned today. There's a season for everything, and I love Ecclesiastes 3. There's a time for everything. And I think we need to really understand that as leaders, that there is a time to do stuff. There's also a time to relax, and there's a time to let your people in your group grow and to empower them. So I think that's my challenge today, is how can I challenge the people around me to, how can I empower them instead of doing everything is my challenge. Right.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. Thank you. And thank you for listening today, everyone. I guess that's it. So I'm not a funny person. I know I should have a joke or whatever, but thank you so much, Tammy, for coming on today. And we'll be all praying for you and your ministry. And